This is the final word. England, West Indies daily, day 2 of the first test at Lord's. Geoff Lemon with you, and courtesy of Test Match Special on the BBC. Henry Moeran joining us because Adam's rushed off to the emergency department because he has children, and that is a thing that you have to do on a semi-regular basis. But thank goodness, Henry, you were there. You were watching the entire day at Lord's. The show's brought to you by Westfield, London, Westfield, Stratford City. Could you, Henry, tell me about today's play in the space of 30 seconds?
I certainly can, Geoff, because it was almost the final day of this test match, albeit only the second day. West Indies finish it on 79 for 6. England eventually bowled out for 371. Jamie Smith scoring 70 on debut. Jimmy Anderson walking out to bat for the final time, almost certainly not getting to even face a ball. How about that? But he did get that ovation from the Lord's crowd. At the end of it, West Indies losing wickets all too regularly, including what turned out to be the final ball of the day, Jason Holder. Last real hope for them to offer any resistance. Caught at short leg, and that just about summed it up. England well on top in the game. Gus Atkinson outstanding. England are going to take a 1-0 lead into the second test.
It was, well, unless you get 3 days of torrential rain, that is going to happen. It could have been worse in a way for West Indies, as in it could have been a longer match overall, but a worse game for them. When Joe Root and Harry Brook were purring along this morning, so they resumed 189 for 3. England move on to 371 by tea all out, so basically making 100 a session to that point. And there's that sort of Joe Root purr where he's just doing it so easily, and I get the feeling this is going to be one of those massive Joe Root summers where he'll stack up runs right, left and centre, because it just looked like it was going to be like that today. And when he got out, it was to a terrific piece of bowling from Gudakesh Motie, who had this burst in the middle where he knocked over Stokes and then Root. But up until that point, I guess the point where Brook gets out, you've got Root on 44, you've got Brook on an even 50. They're taking Shamar Joseph at 4.5 and over. They're taking Alzari Joseph at 6.5 and over. And they were absolutely belting him. And it looked like England might make 600 at that point, even though they wouldn't have needed to do so.
Yeah, they were batting beautifully, those two, Brook and Root, and it felt like it could be one of those days. But credit to West Indies, actually. They did keep chipping away at the England batting lineup. But Joe Root, I mean, you mentioned it could be one of those summers. I think you look at particularly the way that, one, he's batting, and two, the opponents that he's facing. It isn't quite as high quality, particularly back end of the summer with the Sri Lankan test matches. West Indies, we know they've got some good bowlers, but no Kemar Roach is a big miss. Also, Shamar Joseph going down injured today. We don't know how he is. The word from the West Indies camp is they're checking with the physio. So we'll find out in the next 24 hours how he's going. But Joe Root now 9 runs away, I think, from passing Mahela Jayawardene in the list of all-time test run scorers. He's a phenomenal player. We know that, as you say, and it's that purring, that ease of play, driving through the covers. You know when he just leans on the ball and it races away up the hill towards the grandstand, you know that he's playing so well. And it felt as though England could go on and make 600 today. They didn't. They scored 371. There's going to be more than enough, let's make no mistake about it, because West Indies all out for 121 in their first innings, 79 for 6 in their second. They just haven't got the batting resources. England look like they do. And one little word on Jamie Smith, because he's a fascinating cricketer, not least because of the fact that he doesn't keep wicket for Surrey, his county. Ben Foakes, who has been described as the best wicketkeeper in the world, not least by senior members of the England side. He keeps wicket for Surrey. Jamie Smith does not. And so Smith comes into the side in this slightly unusual position of being handed the gloves. He's done perfectly well, by the way, for England, but he's also this gun batter at 7. And to me, I think the likelihood is he's going to end up batting higher than that for England, because he was shepherding the tail a little bit today. It felt as though he had gears to go through, and I think 70 on debut, we're going to see a lot more from him.
When you hear, say, Ben Stokes say that Foakes is the best keeper in the world, it reminds me of Paul McCartney writing that letter to Ringo saying that you're the best drummer in the world, after he's just used a drum machine to do most of the loops on whatever record it was. It's like there's a large but to follow that, like a Sir Mix-a-Lot clip, which is that they're not picking him because they want someone who can smash the ball a fair bit harder. Jamie Smith, he did the classic keeper's job today, which was, there was a point, England weren't in trouble per se, but so Brook flaps at a short ball outside off stump, and that is the one weakness that we've seen in his game so far.
By the way, is a narrative we need to keep an eye out on, particularly because the obsession with the Ashes in Australia in the winter after this one coming up, this fixation with that series, No question about
And
it.
the short
likes
ball.
of Pat Cummins, Josh Hazelwood, Mitchell Stark, we're noting that down and thinking, okay, well, he's a dangerous player and this is how we get him out. But anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, no, I suppose it's that when it seems to me like when the short ball's coming in at the line of the body for Brook, he's not worried about that. He's not afraid of the ball. He doesn't have a problem playing it there. He has a problem with judgment where he tries to play the ball that's really wide of his off stump, and he tries to either sort of slap that over cover or drag it leg side. And from my memory, those are the short balls that are getting him out, not the ones that are headhunting him, but the ones that are making him think it's a run scoring opportunity when it's too dangerous to be doing so. Then you have Motie come on and he bowls an absolute ripper to Stokes. The left-hander batting, and that ball hits the rough and turns in markedly. Stokes would have had trouble playing it with a conventional shot, but he plays a weird sort of flick across the line from outside the off stump, and he's bowled. And then Joe Root gets a much better delivery in that it wasn't just relying on the vagaries of the pitch. It sort of looks like an arm ball. It's angled in from around the wicket, but it turns just enough to beat the outside edge and hit the outside of off stump. So, it's not trouble for England, but they're 287 for 6, and they might be held to a more modest sort of lead when Smith steps in and does that classic keeper's job, really, which is hang in there for a while he's got more reliable players to bat with, puts on a decent little partnership with Chris Wokes and so on, and then goes up through the gears as he goes down through the order. So by the time he's batting with Shoaib Bashir, he's basically making sure Bashir barely faces a ball, certainly doesn't score a run, and Smith starts hitting those sixes over the leg side, including the one that clears the pavilion and goes out into the street.
Amazing. And it's those sort of shots that make you think, well, this is a guy that not only fits the Bazball mould, and we are all getting sick of that phrase, I think, not least the Australian side of things, where it feels to be the kryptonite towards a certain section of Australian cricket. It seems to wind people up in such an unusual way, and England seem to be enjoying the fact that happens. But it felt a little bit different, actually, today, the way that England have approached their batting. It didn't feel quite as aggressive, apart from Jamie Smith, but he did have that licence given the match situation and the fact that he's the sort of player that plays a lot more aggressively than perhaps you might see a Ben Foakes certainly play in that position. He wasn't just nudging it around, keeping the scoreboard ticking over. He wanted to play his shots, not least when he tried to launch it for 6 with Jimmy Anderson not having faced a ball at the other end. So, he's a really interesting cricketer, 23 years old, Jamie Smith, and he's the sort of player you sense. He just fits the mould of what they want in this England side, which is guys that can go through the gears, guys that can take an attack apart, and I think he's a fascinating pick, not least because of what he offers with the bat in that number 7 role, as someone that can come in and be a proper aggressor. He's not going to be, we'll flash it around and might get a few streaky boundaries. He's a proper batter, and that's going to be a really fascinating development in terms of his role in this England side. So, interesting performance from him, certainly. I think England will look at that innings and think, we could have scored a lot more runs. We didn't need to in the end, and that's ultimately going to be the story of this Test match.
A lot of 50s and not much beyond that, which is the kind of thing that on a different surface against a different opposition can be your undoing. But here they had the buffer of bowling West Indies out so cheaply. Shamar Joseph with that sort of hamstring complaint, he went off partway during an over. He came back again, tried to bowl again, got hit for that 6 by Smith, took himself off again. Smith hits another 6 off Jaden Seals at one point, and then the Mikhail Lewis run out. This was a magnificent bit of fielding after. So Smith tries to play one, tries to smash one over cover, hits it high in the air. It lands and chips, and he's trying to get back for the second. And Lewis comes in, picks this up, and from about 50 yards, it seemed like, rocketed a stump out of the ground at the non-striker's end to catch Shoaib Bashir short, and then runs all the way to the boundary where his brother was in the subfielder's vest, who's also in the squad, to talk about it with him. It was a lovely moment.
It was, and it was a sort of celebration that comes from raw enjoyment, thrill, and that unbridled sense of just releasing a huge amount of enthusiastic energy. It was a little bit like what we saw down the streets of St John's Wood when England scored their 90th minute winner in the Euro semi-final. Grown men doing things that were entirely undignified but filled with joy. And actually, it was a lovely moment. There's no indignity in celebrating a moment like that. I loved it. It was great. And when the celebration was shown on the big screen here at Lord's, there was a lovely reaction from the crowd. There was applause, and they loved it because there is nothing more more dramatic than seeing the stumps exploding out of the ground like that. And yeah, it was a run out that England could have done without, but it was a beautiful moment because we love seeing, I suppose, the kind of violence that you get from stumps being struck like that. So brilliant moment. And a couple of minutes later, out came Jimmy Anderson.
Yeah, and this is the bit where Jamie Smith didn't read the room properly. It goes like it's the last ball of the over. Obviously, they want to try to get Anderson on strike, West Indies, so they try to bowl a big wide one down the leg side to make sure that it'll be a dot ball. And he goes after it, slaps it in the air out to deep backward square leg. He gets caught out there. It definitely wasn't the plan. The bowler was laughing about it, but he's made sure that Anderson doesn't get to face a ball in what will almost certainly be his last innings with the bat, because it'd take a miracle for West Indies to even make England bat again, let alone to get down to number 11 in the order. And you know that the only thing that anyone at Lords wanted at that point, they're 250 ahead, is to watch James Anderson face a few balls, maybe score a couple of runs, maybe get the reverse sweep out one more time, maybe get onto a boundary and have that sort of cheer. And I thought, I mean, okay, it is dickering around a little bit with the game, but you're so far ahead of the game, you can afford to say, this is the moment, just let that ball go and just make sure that Anderson gets on strike for the next over and see what happens there. It did feel like an error, and it was frustrating that the crowd who turned out to see Anderson's last game didn't get that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd equate it to an incident that I was present at a couple of miles away from here in Hyde Park back in 2012 when Bruce Springsteen invited Sir Paul McCartney, who's got a couple of mentions already, onto stage. And he announced Paul McCartney by saying, we've waited 50 years for this moment. They played 2 songs and then they pulled the plug on it because they were beyond the curfew. And
some job's worth. Pulled the plug out. Yeah.
This is what the crowd have come for. This is the moment that they were waiting to see. And I'm not saying Jamie Smith has done quite that. And actually, he said after the game, look, it was the one big mistake from my innings. I shouldn't have done that. And he knows that. And it's very easy in hindsight. But the crowd were desperate to see one last over with Anderson batting. The reverse sweep would have come out. Of course it would. It's the party piece. It's Sweet Caroline. It's everything that you're looking for. It's the hit that you're waiting to see. He didn't get that opportunity. And that is a pity. But ultimately, he did get that moment to walk out in front of a Lord's crowd, and his dad is here, his mum's here, and they came up to the media centre, and amazing memories that we've had of Jimmy Anderson and the England media manager Danny Rubin, whose 100th Test match, by the way, this week. He was talking about how when he used to be media manager at Burnley Football Club 25 years ago, there was a shy lad that used to work in the ticket office who in the summer months would head over and bowl for Burnley Cricket Club and rip through the seasoned pros of the Lancashire Leagues, and that young cricketer ended up being Jimmy Anderson with north of 700 Test wickets. So there have been some brilliant stories over the last few days. And hey, look, we're not going to see a Test match that reaches its full conclusion in the sense it's not going to be 5 days. We know that. It's barely made it into the 3rd day. But we have had the opportunity, albeit not seeing him bat, there's been the opportunity for those memories to come flooding back. So that's been something.
Well, and there was the opportunity for him to knock over the first batter in a lineup for the umpteenth time in his career when he bowls Craig Brathwaite with an Anderson classic, that ball that pitches outside the off stump, jags in, hits middle, beautiful piece of bowling early, gets a second wicket later on in the innings. He goes for 4 runs off his first 8 overs, by the way, and then takes his second wicket in his 9th over with a bit of wobble seam away from the left-hander Athanase who pushes and nicks one. So 2 more, he's up to 703, but it was that moment at the top of the innings that was probably better. You'd trade that. You'd rather have that than have him make 8 not out with the bat and then not take one early with the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is what he's done for so long. And the other interesting part of the Anderson narrative in this Test match has also been, because it's here at Lords, with its vagaries, its slight unusual tendencies in terms of course, the slope and the fact that bowlers from different ends seem to get the ball to be able to do different things, swings from one end, not the other, that sort of thing. It was really fascinating to see Anderson almost go through the entire playbook of everything that he's learnt over all of these years. He took his first wicket here bowling Mark Vermeulen against Zimbabwe in 2003, and 21 years later, we're seeing how he's adapted his game, but he's still getting those wickets. He's still breaking through. It's not the young tearaway who's bursting in and bowling at 90 miles an hour. It's subtle. It's clever. It's the old master at work. And it has been, certainly, if you had said there's going to be somebody whose name starts with an A and ends in Son who takes 7 wickets in the first innings in this Test match, you'd have thought, yes, lovely, it's James Anderson. It's Gus Atkinson.
Very good.
Unlucky. But what ultimately we have seen in this Test is Anderson bowling bowling well, and he's taken wickets, and he's done what
Yep.
England would have wanted him to do. It would have been, in some ways, a real disappointment if, I don't know, he'd taken 5 wickets that were skied in the air and they weren't quite the Anderson wickets. But what we've seen today is really clever bowling. That little nick-off was just such a lovely piece of Anderson classic bowling. And it kind of summed up his career. And look, there are going to be so many highlights packages of everything that he's done across his career. Goodness me, they've given them a good run over the last few days here at Lord's. But it felt like the 2 wickets today were such classic Anderson dismissals that were honed and crafted from over 2 decades of playing at this fascinating venue.
Well, he can't catch Shane Warne's 708 now because there's only 4 left to take, so he could get to 707 at best, although I have seen some petitioning to retroactively strike off the ICC World 11 wickets from Shane Warne's tally, which would take him back to 702, if you count wickets taken against specific nations. Anyway, I'll leave that up to other people to argue with the statisticians about. Ben Stokes bowled a smart spell as well, like clever to when he's bowling to the left-hander to Mackenzie. He gets it to pitch just in line with the leg stump and then zip through to get him LBW. And then you talk about using the trick or inexperience. Wins a pause of about 10 minutes that ends up being a drinks break to get the ball changed, and then manages to sort of stand one up off the seam and get the outside edge afterwards as well, when Lewis gets out, who's been hanging tough, the opener on debut, who'd been soaking up a lot of deliveries. And then they just sort of tried to bat time, it seemed, for the most part. Athanase hits 3 boundaries in 4 or 5 balls off Atkinson at one point, but that was the only sign of life. And Jason Holder was just batting time, and it wasn't really going to do anything. There was kind of no point doing so. Stokes gets his 200th wicket. I was curious about this, though. The whole, we've got to get rid of Anderson because we've got to play the kids. Atkinson bowled 6 overs, Stokes bowled 10 in a row through the middle, and Bashir didn't bowl at all. A bit of curious bit of captaincy, although despite the wickets that Stokes picked up.
Stokes and his bowling's been such a fascinating narrative over the last couple of years, hasn't it? Because watching him in the Ashes last year and watching him bowl, you winced watching it because every time you could see the pain that he was
painful.
in.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, this guy shouldn't be doing that, because you're watching it a bit like you're watching someone who's walking across a room with bits of Lego all over the floor. You're just waiting for something incredibly painful to happen. And in the end, you think, well, something's got to change here and it has to shift. But actually, he's come back and he's looked really good with the ball, much better actually than he's looked with the bat in the last few months playing first-class cricket for Durham and then in this Test match. And I think it changes England entirely. They're a completely different side when they've got the option of Stokes as the all-rounder, and a true all-rounder. And that's what he said ahead of this Test match. He said, I want to be the cricketer I've been known for the last 10 years. I want to bowl the overs. And we know that he can bowl long spells. He's done that throughout his career when he's been fit enough to do so. I think, certainly Shoaib Bashir's lack of opportunity in this Test match is much down to the fact that the conditions have afforded the opportunity to the seamers, and West Indies haven't batted long enough to actually necessitate him. But no question, he's going to be the guy that England turn to this summer in terms of spin options. We know that, the fact that they've given him the opportunity, as like Jamie Smith, who is not the first choice keeper at Surrey, Shoaib Bashir is not the first choice spinner at Somerset, Jack Leach is. So England are picking guys that aren't actually performing those roles for their counties, which is this really, again, interesting part of this whole selection.
It is odd, isn't it? He'll probably get 2 sympathy overs tomorrow so that it's not a complete thanks for coming, given that he wasn't allowed to score a run. Jamie Smith was turning down runs for Shoaib Bashir. Also amusing that Gus Atkinson got a golden duck at the hands of Jason Holder after getting Jason Holder out for a golden duck in that West Indies first innings. So they were going back and forth there. We might see a little tiny bit of Shoaib Bashir tomorrow. 4 overs to pick up. Anderson finishes the day with 10 overs, 2 for 11. Quick break, then the final word Hall of Fame. It's the final word. England, West Indies Daily, brought to you by Westfield, London, Westfield, Stratford City. And they say to us, this week is all about Jim. He's lowering the curtain, or having the curtain lowered for him, on a career that stretches so far back that his first international wicket was Adam Gilchrist. But as we fondly bid farewell to James Anderson, there's a new Jim in town, the Jim Shark. If the Jim Shark conjures images of Greg Norman wandering naked around his boat with a bench press set up on the back deck, you couldn't be more wrong. That is a thing that actually happened, Henry, once on Instagram, maybe more than once. Jim Shark is the hottest athleisure brand in the world, and this weekend they open their second and therefore newest store at Westfield, Stratford City. So if you want to look your best next time you're pumping iron or trying to fool people into thinking you pump iron, come down and have a gander. Westfield, Stratford City. Swing it like Jim on the Jim swing. Now, today, I mean, quite a lot of amusing things happened today, some of which I've mentioned earlier, and some of which I've held back. But I'm interested to know what tickled your fancy, Henry Moeran.
All sorts of things interested me today at Lord's, and I think for me it's something that we've mentioned already. But the Jamie Smith dismissal and not reading the room of Jimmy Anderson waiting to get the opportunity to have a bat. The build-up was sensational. He walked down the steps. The crowd panned to his family. The camera panned to his family in the crowd. The sense of anticipation. The crowd were up on their feet, as was said on commentary. There have been fewer bigger cheers for a batter, and this is not the sort of batter that is known for scoring big runs here at the home of cricket. And he stands there at the non-striker's end, ball's launched to the leg side, thanks a lot, off you go, back to the dressing room, and it was all a bit, all right, thanks a lot,
just don't
Jamie.
do it. I was sitting there watching going, just don't get out. Just don't, you've got one job here, don't get out. Just see out the over. No late singles, no run-outs, let's keep it nice. No, just had to go for it. Oh, well, it's one that he'll replay. I particularly enjoyed it. So we talked about the Anderson wicket of Craig Brathwaite, but if I wind back a few days, and Craig Brathwaite he's a taciturn gentleman at the best of times. He doesn't give a lot in his media conferences, which he has to do because he's the captain and people have to come and they have to ask him the questions and he has to not answer them or give you as few syllables as he possibly can. So I'm not sure who it was, but I was listening to the recording of the one the day before the game, and somebody was clearly trying to build a piece around Anderson, a pre-game piece, and they were saying, oh, well, it might not be a great memory for you, Craig, but you were his 500th wicket back in, was it during the COVID games? Anyway, whenever it was. Do you remember the delivery? And Craig Brathwaite said, yeah, I remember it. I don't think about it very much. And that was it. And I was like, come on, man. Like, this poor guy's just trying to write a piece. Give him something. Give him a line. But he was furiously determined not to give him a line. And then he gets out to the identical delivery in the identical way here today. And it felt like a bit of a comeuppance. So, you're going to pretend that you don't remember that ball? Clearly you don't remember it.
If he'd shown that commitment to defence with those two deliveries that he did to answering that question, maybe we wouldn't be asking that question. It was a remarkable coincidence that it was exactly the same dismissal, out for 4 from 26 deliveries, just the one scoring shot in there. And again, it was that classic Anderson dismissal, wasn't it? And actually, that Brathwaite dismissal, you sort of thought, there's problems here, because he's been there 26 deliveries, he scored 4 runs, they've lost an early wicket. England have got a lead that is mammoth from the first innings. There was a real concern, and I say concern quite genuinely, that this game could finish in 2 days, because actually we don't want Test cricket to be over in 2 days. And there is a bit of a notion that, exciting cricket, wickets falling. No, I don't want that. I want to see good competitive cricket, and you want to see teams up against each other, fighting tooth and nail. And a test that finishes in 3 days feels unsatisfactory to me. You want to at least take it to the 4th day, but the fact that we were looking this evening and thinking, is the extra half hour coming along? Are we going to see this West Indies side capitulate? I'm delighted that they haven't, that they lost a wicket to the final ball of the day, but I'm really pleased that we're going to be back tomorrow morning. Not least because I think that there's a lot of spectators that will be coming along and lots that will be having their first experience of this great game, and you want matches to last a long time. Now, the one statistic I think is worth bearing in mind in all of this, because there's been a lot of people saying, it's another example of the end of West Indies cricket and everything else. Well, 2 things. 1, the Gabba earlier this year, so let's not forget that as a starting place. 2, they've had 1 warm-up match, West Indies. It's little surprise that they've come into this test match looking a little bit undercooked. 3, in 2017 in that series, Jimmy Anderson, that we mentioned, he had a field day in the day-night test at Edgbaston that England won by an innings and 200 plus runs. They're going to win this game by fewer runs than that, and in 2017 West Indies fought back in the next test and won at Headingley by 5 wickets. Shai Hope scoring those 200. So we can't write off this series, but I'm mighty glad that we're not writing off this game inside 2 days, because I just think optically it's really poor. It's rubbish for Test cricket when you've got games like that.
Sure, but it's also just the nature of Test cricket is that when teams win, they often tend to win by a huge margin. Cricket is a game for blowouts in a way that other sports are not, or a way that other sports look less unflattering on the scoreboard, even if a game's been completely dominated. You can have football games that one team dominates and they win 1-0 or 2-0, and it just doesn't look embarrassing in the same way, even if it's been a complete tear-up. So I think that is different. And none of the West Indies Test team hasn't played since the Gabba. None of them have played Test cricket. Shamar Joseph, I think, has bowled 14 overs in competitive cricket between then and now, because he couldn't get a plane out of Guyana because of the hurricane that had us stuck in Barbados for extra days, and he couldn't get to England in time for the warm-up game. So all of that you've got to bear in mind. I'll also throw in, for Hall of Fame, Chris Wokes with the beautiful timing of the flick off the pads that was so nice that it carried to the deep mid-wicket boundary, which surprised him greatly. He wasn't trying to hit a six. He was just trying to flick it into the leg side. It ended up getting out to it. And then we were talking, Adam and I were talking a couple of days ago about James Anderson and his 29 tests at Lords, and pondering whether that was a record. We've had some reader correspondence to point out that Big Angelo Matthews, has already played 29 at Gaul, and so he's got to be a good shout to sneak in another test there and have the most for any player at any venue. And it raises the question, and you as someone who's interested in football might have some input, can we create a podcast with Big Ange Matthews and Big Ange Postecoglou where they could just get the shoes off, kick back, and just chat, whatever came to mind in Big Ange world?
It's what's surprising about this is it's not already happened for me. Yeah. I mean, the crossover feels obvious. It feels like, in terms
natural
of links and subjects, there's so much to go. I mean, Ange Postecoglou is a big cricket fan. He loves his cricket, and we're determined to get him along to a test match at some stage. I don't know how big a football fan Angelo Matthews is, but it's an obvious link.
Probably is.
And I'm always a fan of any podcast series or TV program that starts with the title and works backwards from there. Don't worry about the concept. Don't worry about the theory behind it. Have a good title and go back from there.
That's it. Just kick it up the chain at the BBC, Henry. See if you can get any biters. Put the bait on the hook and let the fish come to you. All right, that's enough. This has been the final word. England, West Indies, daily day 2 of the second test at Lords, brought to you by Westfield London, Westfield, Stratford City. Thanks to Henry Moeran for joining us from Test Match Special. And we'll be back for day 3. And, who knows, if some wild miracle happens, maybe even day 4, maybe even day 5. We can't rule anything out in Test cricket. You never can, never do. It will make a fool of you in the end. All right. We'll see you for day 3.